Week 2 is already here. As always, we're here to walk you through the entire slate of games, discussing the stats and the film notes you need to know to win your matchups. Timestamps are at the bottom, so if you want to dive to any specific matchup, go ahead and do that. We will cover Thursday night football at the end. And that's it. Let's dive straight into the Sunday main slate. Tom, we're going to start with the San Francisco 49ers against the Minnesota Vikings, fresh off a Monday night football victory against my Jets, dare we say. Are the 49ers deemed to repeat and just be an offensive juggernaut yet again?
Well, it's like the Niners weren't even necessarily at their best, but they completely beat the Jets. And I think it says more about the Jets, and we'll get to them later, than it does about the Niners. I mean, the Niners went 3 and out and then scored on 9 straight drives. You had Jordan Mason coming in there at potentially short notice, depending on which reports you believe, carrying the ball 28 times, which, as you can see on screen there, most running back touches in the Shanahan era. Like, the trust in this guy was implicit. You had Brandon Ayuk, who was rusty, but still was out there, played plenty. Yes, he dropped a potential touchdown, but otherwise things just kind of clicked as normal. Deebo Samuel had 13 for 77 and a touchdown. He looked fine. He looked like he was a decent part of the game plan. George Kittle had a middling week for him, 4 for 40, but in the scheme of things, against every other tight end pretty much being awful last week, George Kittle was fine. Brock Purdy had a disappointing week because he was only the QB 24, but that's what happens when you throw no passing touchdowns and you have a running back who touches the ball, 28 times or so? So I don't think that we need to really worry too much about the Niners. It kind of comes back to, is CMC out there this week? That sounds doubtful at the minute. And if it is, then just how high do you rank Jordan Mason? For me, I think you're talking about a top 12 running back against a Vikings defense that isn't anything to necessarily be scared of. On the Vikings side, we didn't get huge takeaways apart from the fact that Sam Darnold should be fine in this system, as we thought he would be, because it's such a QB-friendly system. He went 19 of 24, 8.7 yards per attempt. Justin Jefferson can absolutely work with that. And then Aaron Jones averaged 6.7 yards per carry, which was far better than I possibly expected. He had a little bit of separation between him and Ty Chandler for at least now, but Ty Chandler was still out there on 39% of the running back opportunities. So yeah, it was more confirmation on these two teams rather than anything startling that made me want to reassess things.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to break down the Minnesota offense. We heard all preseason Jalen Nailor's the guy. Jalen Nailor's the guy going to be the third wide receiver. Turned out Brandon Powell was the guy that was running ahead of him. It was only once Jordan Addison got injured that Jalen Nailor came in. Now, looks like Jordan Addison's probably going to miss this week, which maybe opens up a role for Jalen Nailor, but I'm not expecting big things there. And yes, Aaron Jones had a really good week 1, but almost 40% opportunity share for Ty Chandler is a lot bigger than I was expecting. If that's going to be closer to a 50-50 split moving forward, yes, Aaron Jones is, traditionally very efficient on his touches, but I'm a little bit nervous about Aaron Jones moving forward. And then on this 49ers side, Brock Purdy coming into the year had the highest touchdown to pass ratio any quarterback that started over 16 games. It was absolutely insane. Are we going to see that regress significantly this year? If we do, he's suddenly going to be kind of a back-end QB2 rather than that sort of high-end QB2 that people have drafted him to be in Superflex leagues.
I think part of it comes back to the fact that Shanahan just saw a weakness on the Jets. Particularly, we know Hassan Reddick, the Niners typically do a lot of outside zone runs, but instead they just went up the gut with Jordan Mason and pounded a weakness all night long. And I think because it was working, he didn't feel the need to put so much on the passing game. And yeah, I think that Brock Purdy gets back to better ways sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think the Jets defense were just one step behind last week. Shanahan started with the outside zone. The Jets started overplaying it, putting extra bodies, shifting outside, then just pounded it down the middle. They brought safeties in the box, then started passing it around. It was literally just toying with the Jets defense, and it was embarrassing. The big question, though, I think I've probably had more this week than any other, Tom. Christian McCaffrey, rest of season. If you're in a redraft league, you probably spent the 101 to bring him in. Are you rolling with him, hoping that he gets healthy, or are you looking to move him
It's you can't move him right now because you'll be selling low. The time to move CMC, you are going to have to hold him, and it might be detrimental to your team in the near future. But you need to hold him long enough to get those positive reports that CMC might play this week, and that's at the point where you should probably look to move on. I mean, we spent the offseason talking about it. CMC's been remarkably healthy since he was traded from the Carolina Panthers, but this feels like a slippery slope. It was the same injury that was bothering him in the playoffs, but he could play through it. Is he going to be able to now, a year older? I don't know. And if he starts losing touches to Jordan Mason, it's going to be a slippery slope.
Yeah, I think it's a case of what you're trying to do. If you're looking to make the playoffs, you probably need to trade him. If you're looking to win your title, you need Christian McCaffrey on your team, quite frankly. Start sits, it feels fairly straightforward, to be honest. Start all 49ers that are active, start Justin Jefferson, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon Ayuk, I've spoke to a few people who are a little wary of starting him, but I think the one game should be enough to start ramping up. We've seen plenty of players who they just need that week of training to really get going. On the Niners side, Jordan Addison, if he starts, I wouldn't be touching him. And Sam Darnold, I'd be fine with in super flex leagues if you need to. Ty Chandler, we're just not quite there yet, but if things carry on like this, by the time we get to bye weeks, I think you will be at time.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are joining us for the first time, though, 60% of people watching this video haven't hit the subscribe button. Be in the 40%. Hit subscribe, come join us. We guarantee we will be helping you win those matchups week in, week out. Moving across to Tampa Bay versus Detroit, one of the higher over-unders on the slate, Tom, 51. Is this a matchup you're looking to attack for your DFS columns?
I think so, to an extent. Like, you look back last week and we were all over the Tampa Bay stuff. Washington, we knew were going to be a poor defense. I don't think the Lions' pass defense is going to perform that poorly. One area which is worth noting is that Cooper Kupp kind of gave the Lions trouble last week. He saw a huge amount of targets, as we would expect, without Puka Nacua on the field, but he was primarily operating from the slot. So is this going to be a week where we can look at Chris Godwin, who did see a bit of an increase in his slot rate, up from like 34% last year to 43% last week? So if we get more Chris Godwin operating out of the slot, this perhaps becomes a really good matchup for him. The question then just becomes, you're obviously starting Mike Evans, but can you trust Rachaad White with his opportunity share dropping down from 72% average last year down to 61% in this first game? Like, quite often we see rookies have to earn their way onto the field throughout the season. Bucky Irving just went out there in day one and looked pretty damn good. Like, I'm not quite at the point where I'd want to be starting Bucky Irving, but if you're a Rachaad White owner, this is what we've warned about. Like, he's not efficient enough that he can get by if somebody starts eating into his workload. Now, yes, what got him out of jail last week was the fact that he had a 20% target share. If Jalen McMillan keeps growing into his role, is Rachaad White going to be able to sustain a 20% target share? I would be quite surprised. So, yeah, this one kind of feels like Godwin's the real answer on the Bucs side. I think we saw enough to have confidence in this new Liam Cohen offense for the Bucs. You know, when Baker goes out and puts up 4 touchdowns, you've kind of got to take notice. But it's not going to be like that every week because we're not playing the Commanders. On the Lions side of things, neither running back had over a 50% opportunity share, so neither of them have wrestled control of this job to start the season. But they're both startable. I think they're both fine options. I don't think this Bucs run defense is as good as it once was, where we wanted to stay away from them all the time. It was Amon-Ra St. Brown's 6th career game out of 52 where he had 3 or fewer catches. So that was kind of the massive talking point coming out of last week. But we've seen enough from Amon-Ra that he'll bounce back. I have no worry about that. But we've kind of talked a lot about Jameson Williams and how much of a boom bust player he was. How much did it trigger you to see 9 targets and a 32% target share for him?
Yeah, it was tough. I've said that I've faded Jameson Williams for the last 3 years. I have to admit, I was really impressed with him at the weekend. And I think for me, I was fading Jameson Williams, expecting him to be a 4 or 5 target a game, just run the deep stuff and not be able to command more than that. The way that they had him running routes and were using him in terms of crosses and kind of getting the ball in his hand, letting him be yak and kind of manufactured touches, it's like, okay, I need to rethink Jameson Williams because I didn't think he had this in his game. I didn't think he was this good of a route runner. And it's like, I think it sounds slightly ridiculous after 1 week, but I almost need to completely redo my take on Jameson Williams because I didn't think he had this in his locker at all.
I think that's after seeing that, it's definitely fair to approach the next few games with a completely blank slate and see how it is, because it can be so easy to get locked into our priors. And Jameson Williams, when we talked about like wide receivers who we were wary of in the summer, we talked about the fact that his start to the NFL season, the reason why he's not produced over his career so far, it's so different to virtually any other wide receiver that you have to give him a little more leeway. I saw some people who were scared off on Sam Laporta with him only getting 8.5 PPR points, but that's what Sam Laporta averaged last year. He averaged 8.8 when he wasn't scoring touchdowns. So look, Laporta ran pure last year on touchdowns, and he's not going to necessarily do the same this year, particularly if Jameson Williams takes a bigger leap. But I wouldn't have much worries about this offense in general. You know, people don't have worries about starting the studs on the Niners or starting the studs on the Chiefs when they had like Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. You've got to accept that there's going to be weeks where really talented players put up huge numbers, and then there's going to be weeks where they don't.
And I think part of the issue with the Detroit offense is that last year, Amon St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jamal Gibbs, and to a certain extent David Montgomery were all so good because the offense was so consolidated. It was basically the three receiving options, and that was it. If you're adding Jameson Williams into that, I don't think Sam Laporta, Amon St. Brown, and Jamal Gibbs are going to be able to be as efficient just because there's not as many targets to go around. And I think Detroit has got a harder schedule this year, and the defense has improved, so they're probably going to have fewer offensive snaps and things. And I just think that, yeah, they could all be still really good fantasy options, but I don't think we're going to see Sam Laporta tight end one. I don't think we're going to see Amon St. Brown top 5 wide receiver. I don't think we're going to see Jamal Gibbs as a top 5 running back. And just that one extra mouth to feed in the offense, I think, drops everybody. So, yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about this Detroit offense moving forward. The one thing I do want to mention, though, Tom, I bang on it about Chris Godwin for the past 2 years. Manufactured touches. First 2 drives on Sunday, 2 screens. Boom.
I saw that and I was
Chris
like,
Godwin's back.
I knew you'd be taking note of that as soon as I saw it.
Yeah, absolutely. From a start-sits perspective, it feels, I guess the one we're kind of umming and ahhing about is Jameson Williams, but apart from that, it's pretty much start all your studs and don't worry about anyone else.
Yeah, I think most teams, with how you drafted Jameson Williams, you probably got him as your wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4. So I don't have a problem if people want to take an extra week and see how the production is going to play out over a couple of weeks. If you're in deeper leagues, most of these start sits we're talking about in traditional leagues where you're starting 2, 3 wide receivers. But if you're in deeper leagues like some of the ones we play in where you've got 5 positions where you could start a wide receiver, so then you're definitely starting him. But in those shallower leagues, I'm fine taking another week. Bucky Irving, I'm still going to want a little more of a glimpse at before we decide. And then Baker Mayfield in 1 QB format, I wouldn't be starting despite the good week last week, but I would be in Superflex.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got Jameson Williams. He's my wide receiver 35 this week. So, yeah, as you said, in that sort of flex play, maybe if you're a little bit lighter, but plenty of options, I'd rather start over him. Moving across to perhaps the biggest surprise last week, the second most efficient offense in the league versus one of the best defenses in the league with Mike Zimmer coming on top. Could this be, iron sharpen iron, unstoppable force meets irresistible object, or are we going to see a damp squib?
We've got to throw the caveat out there that the Saints were playing the Panthers, who looked just dreadful and couldn't stop anything, couldn't do anything on offense. So it just allowed the Saints to really do what they wanted. But what was notable was that they went from being a team that virtually never used motion to 88% pre-snap motion rate, which was first across the league last week. That makes everything so much better. Once you start opening up things like that and you start stressing your defense, it allows players to get loose. We saw Rashid Shaheed go for 3 receptions for 73 yards and a touchdown. We saw them spread the ball around. Nobody had more than 5 targets, which is not necessarily a great thing for Chris Olave or the guys who we want to have huge amounts of touches. But they didn't need to. They didn't need to force feed anyone because the game was out of the Panthers' reach pretty quickly. The one thing that felt noteworthy in particular to me was that Foster Moreau saw 51 snaps to Juwan Johnson's 23. We know Juwan Johnson's still ramping up from the injury that he suffered right around the beginning of training camp. But now Foster Moreau has a concussion, and it's not clear if he'll play this week. So I'm probably steering away from starting Juwan Johnson simply because we don't know if he's injured. But when they're both back and healthy, I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to that because I really liked the idea that Juwan Johnson could have a very good season. On the Cowboys side, I do think the Cowboys defense is going to have a fun day on Sunday because this Saints offensive line, we talked about it all offseason. It looks awful. And it's one thing to keep Derek Carr clean against the Panthers, who traded away the best pass rusher in Brian Branch, but not Brian Branch, Brian Burns. But then when you start talking about the Cowboys, who pressured Deshaun Watson on 22 out of 42 snaps last week, that's a whole other world. So I think the Cowboys defense can put them in a position where this doesn't need to be kind of like as high a volume perhaps for the Cowboys as sometimes, last week they were made a lot of plays because the Browns defense kept things in check. It didn't really kind of go crazy in the way that we sometimes see the Cowboys, but we saw 32% target share for CD Lamb, despite the fact he hadn't practiced very much. Brandon Cooks looks good. I'd be happy starting Brandon Cooks most week. Zeke, though, getting 12 touches to Rico Dowdle was not what we wanted to see. I thought everything was kind of leaning towards Rico Dowdle being the lead back early based on some of the coach speak, but it ended up just being a case of, okay, well, they are going to ride Zeke early because Jerry Jones loves Zeke, and I'm sure that we'll see that flip later on. But for now, you can see I've got Rico in the sixth column this week, but just it doesn't feel like a great one. But are you worried about Chris Olave at all?
No, not at all. And I've recommended him as a buy to a couple of people. I think that you look at Chris Olave over the last few years, he's been one of the most efficient wide receivers when motion is used, when play action is used. Like, if that's the kind of offense we're going to see in New Orleans, I'm wheels up for Chris Olave. I think the problem last week was that this game was out of hand. The Saints were up 17-0 and the Panthers had run 6 offensive plays. Like, it was absolutely obscene how quickly this game got out of hand. And it's like, why are you going to throw the ball to Chris Olave all day when you're already up 3 scores? I just think that he's going to have some better weeks. I'm really concerned about them this week, though, because I think that Derek Carr, when he has time, when he's kept clean, is an elite quarterback. The problem is that he cannot cope versus the rush. And when he is put under pressure, his eyes drop, he gets nervous, and he can't push the ball downfield. He's not like Jared Goff, who's willing to stay in and take a hit. And as you said earlier, this Cowboys defense is going to put pressure on him all day. And so maybe if you're looking to go and buy Chris Olave, maybe it's after this week where he maybe puts up another quiet one. But I still believe in talent. I think he's going to be elite. And on the Cowboys running back situation, the concerning thing is you said Zeke wasn't great, wasn't efficient, but saw most of the work. We're probably adding Dalvin Cook into the mix this week. If this is now going to be a 3-headed monster, I don't want to touch any of them, quite frankly. If you want your start sit questions answered, though, you can drop them in the comments below. We will answer 100% of the questions we get all the way up to kickoff. Get them in that comment and we will answer them straight away. We're moving across to Seattle versus New England. Now, Tom, New England last week, they had a very clear plan. They were going to shorten the length of the game. They ran 6 offensive linemen, over triple the amount of any team in the NFL last week. They shortened the game so much that the Bengals only got 8 offensive drives. Are you concerned that that could mean we can't start any Seattle players if it's going to be shortened that much?
No, because I think when you look at what the Seahawks want to do, they had the 8th highest pace over expectation last week. That's Ryan Grubb stat. That's the new offensive coordinator pushing them to be, a faster paced team, which is what we saw from his teams at Washington. So I think they're fine. The big question is whether Kenneth Walker plays. He missed practice yesterday, but if he does, it's wheels up because he played 58% third downs last week compared to 19% average last year. So very high on Kenneth Walker. But if he doesn't play, then Zach Charbonnet becomes probably one of the starts of the week. Otherwise, I don't really want any JSN until I see a better role from him. I was really hoping we were going to see it last week, but we got 3.3 air yards per target, still just being used way too close to the line of scrimmage to really be fantastic unless you see high volume. And DK Metcalf should have a bounce back. He was shadowed by Patrick Surtain, as we sort of talked about last week. The Patriots do occasionally use shadow corners, but I don't think that we need to worry about the Patriots corners in the same way that Patrick Surtain did. On the Patriots side, though, yeah, wheels up on Ramondre. It was so good to see him go out there, put up 120 rushing yards, 10 missed tackles. But I don't think you can start anyone else. Is there anyone else you'd start on the Patriots side?
No, not at all. I think if you're desperate and you're in need, maybe Hunter Henry. But yeah, it's a pretty grim matchup. As you said, that over under is so low. I think the Patriots are going to try and run the ball and keep it so kind of the clock running that we could see very low points. So I'm a little bit concerned about Deco. I'm not as high as you. I think Christian Gonzalez is, arguably in that second tier, pushing that elite corner status. And I'm a little bit worried if he's going to shadow DK, that could impact him there as well.
Yeah, and then the only other note, just quickly, was just that Hunter Henry was somebody who was quite a popular sleeper tight end name over the summer, but Austin Hooper had a 17% target share. Hunter Henry's was 13%. Despite the fact that he played 23 more snaps, it seemed like when Austin Hooper was on the field, they were quite happy to involve him. So for now, Hunter Henry's a sit until we see him take command of that tight end room.
Absolutely. And the next matchup we're going to go to is two potentially mobile running quarterbacks, but not excited about the potential that this offense could have in Green Bay without Jordan Love. Are you comfortable starting any Packers with Malik Willis under center?
Not really. I think, you might have to. You might find yourself in a situation where you've got to look at like guys like Jaden Reed, Josh Jacobs. I mean, Josh Jacobs will be fine. I think Josh Jacobs could be good here. I mean, they allowed Joe Mixon, the Colts, to go ham last week, have like 30 touches for a good amount of rushing yards. So no problem with Josh Jacobs, but Malik Willis has been an awful quarterback in the NFL. Like, he played 6 games in 2022, averaged a 50% completion rate. He's never thrown a passing touchdown in all those games. His 3.39 seconds time to throw would have been dead last week. His 21.6 rush yards per game that he put up in 2022. That's how many Baker Mayfield got in week 1. So Malik Willis, it's not like the rushing has made up for everything else. It's not like you could look at him and go like, okay, well, it's like Justin Fields in 2022 where he wasn't an accurate quarterback, but he was rushing a lot. Malik Willis has just shown us absolutely nothing. I have no confidence that he's going to be particularly good for any of the Packers pass catchers, which is a shame because coming out of last week where we saw Tucker Kraft have 78% route participation, I was really hoping that we'd see that kick on. Luke Musgrave was 8th on the team in route participation at 21%. Christian Watson, we know he's going to be incredibly boom or bust. Jaden Reed can be efficient. And then on the other side of things, this was very encouraging for Jonathan Taylor on the point that he had 100% of running back touches, but he also had not a single target. So it was kind of confirmation of what we expected there. Also, you had Anthony Richardson rushing for a touchdown from a few yards out. So I don't really feel too different about much. I'm not in a rush to start Alec Pierce after the 65-yard touchdown, though. That was impressive, but it wasn't like he was an every down look. I think I'd probably lean back into Michael Pittman this week after feeling like last week's game wasn't one that would suit him. I'd be fine starting him in this matchup.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about Pittman rest of season. I think the reason he was such a stud last year was that insane first read RPO usage that we saw from Gardner Minshew. Well, they basically took the RPOs out of the offense last week. Now, that could be that it was just a 1-week game plan thing, but I'm seriously concerned that if Anthony Richardson's not going to be in that RPO heavy attack, that's going to eat into Michael Pittman's volume, and we know he needs that volume to produce. On the Anthony Richardson side, I feel like this is going to be the roller coaster each week. I know everybody's talked about the 65-yard bomb and throwing off his back foot and all that kind of thing. It was amazing. He also missed AD Mitchell for 2 walk-in touchdowns. I think that he operates between the ears like a franchise quarterback, but there are still accuracy concerns and issues. So yeah, I don't think Anthony Richardson is the second coming quite yet, but from a rushing perspective, he's always going to be in your fantasy lineup, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, you can't bench Anthony Richardson unless it's a really daunting matchup, and this just isn't a daunting matchup. So yeah, I have no problem with this one at all. But yeah, generally speaking, I think the starts and sits are pretty clear, and I'd only be starting a Packers player if I absolutely had to.
Absolutely. Now, I think the Washington defense is the single worst side of the ball in the entire NFL right now. They were absolutely abysmal last week.
And
The New
last
York
year.
Giants, yeah. Daniel Jones, since he signed his $160 million contract, has thrown more touchdowns to the opposition than he has to his own team. Do we think that finally regresses and he's going to throw some touchdowns, considering how horrendous this Washington defense is?
This is the perfect matchup for Daniel Jones after that week. You know, we saw the videos of Daniel Jones getting booed by his own fans as he left the stadium, which is that's quite a harsh point in any player's career. You know, he is coming back from a couple of pretty serious injuries last year, not only the ACL, but also the neck injury that he dealt with. So I think Daniel Jones should feel much better about going into this game. We just talked about how Baker Mayfield had 21 rushing yards. They're clearly giving up rushing yards to non-mobile quarterbacks. Perhaps Daniel Jones can get scooting around a little bit. I put Malik Neighbors down as my start of the week last week, and it didn't really pan out. But look, Malik Neighbors played 100% of the snaps. He only got 7 targets, but Malik Neighbors could absolutely go ham here. Wan'Dale Robinson was the quintessential PPR scam with 11 targets last week. Again, he should be going ham. When it comes to Darius Slayton and Jalen Hyatt, it's kind of difficult to decipher what their role is. But Daniel Jones should be getting the ball out, and he should be getting the ball out quickly to Neighbors and Wan'Dale all day, because both of them have shown that they're NFL caliber wide receivers. Outside of that, for the Giants, the only player who I think is interesting at the minute is Devin Singletary, who handled a decent amount of touches, 62% running back opportunity share, also had 5 targets. We saw Tyrone Tracy playing ahead of Eric Gray, but both of them only had 3 touches. Neither of them is eating into Singletary's workload enough to worry about whether you can start Singletary at the minute. The tight end room, I know people want the Giants to have a relevant tight end. It seems like ever since Evan Ingram left, people are desperate for somebody to be relevant there. Theo Johnson played 85% of the snaps compared to Daniel Bellinger's 22%. But I mean, like, neither of them seems like they're going to see any particular volume. So the more interesting offense is obviously the Commanders side, where Jaden Daniels was QB3 on the week last week, had a 70% completion rate, which is probably higher than a lot of people expected. But of course, part of that is because Cliff Kingsbury did Cliff Kingsbury things and kept everything close to the line of scrimmage. We saw Daniels have an average depth of target of 5.2 yards, which is half of what he had last year at LSU when he averaged 10.5. Brian Robinson, we talked about him so much. Both of us talked about him being our guy for 2024. And even though he was playing similar snaps to Austin Eckler, like 55% to 52%, he had a 72% opportunity share, 15 touches to Eckler's 6. And Eckler graded out absolutely woefully in PFF's pass blocking grade this week. So if Eckler isn't getting the ball when he's on the field as much as Robinson, and if he's not doing a great job in pass protection, I think that the gap between them can separate. But yeah, aside from that, like, I'll let you talk about Terry McLaurin, because it's just the same old with Cliff Kingsbury.
Yeah, it's infuriating, isn't it? We saw him in Arizona with DeAndre Hopkins, where he lined him up on the left side as left wide receiver, and that's basically where he stayed, never moved him. And there were question marks in the preseason about whether he was going to do the same as Terry McLaurin. It's like, no, we're going to move him around. We're going to get him. Nope. Over 80% of the snaps, left wide receiver. 6 times he moved away from left wide receiver and it was into the slot in a reduced snap. It's just wild. Like, maybe because people have talked about it, we get to see him moved around, maybe move some motion. But I'm really concerned about this offense. I think that Jaden Daniels, look, he was great for fantasy, and I think as long as he's going to have, 16 rush attempts, he's always going to be incredible for fantasy. But my real issue is, as a prospect, I didn't think he could sit in the pocket and go 1 to 2 to 3. He didn't show that last week. When he stayed in the pocket, his ADOT was woeful. He got rid of the ball so quickly. He never progressed truly through reads. And then the outside of structure plays were non-existent. Every single time he broke the pocket on Sunday, he rushed, he scrambled. There was 0 times where he broke the pocket and passed. And I just think that until, we're 1 week in, but I think he needs to improve and kind of needs to round out his game, certainly. From a start sits, I mean, you've pretty much covered it all, really. I think Daniel Jones maybe in Superflex, but even then you're probably struggling a little bit. Outside of that, it's all the options that you kind of covered.
Yeah, and I know people know that I've got a bit of bias on the Brian Robinson Austin Eckler thing, but Austin Eckler was out there plenty, but he didn't do an awful lot. If you've got faith in Austin Eckler, if you drafted him to be your RB2, RB3, then fine, start him. But for me, I don't think it's enough of a role just yet.
Before we move on to the next matchup, though, if you haven't hit that subscribe button, go ahead, click it now. We will get you content throughout the season that will help you win your leagues. Cleveland versus Jacksonville. There is plenty of information, rumors, all sorts of stuff floating around Cleveland this week. Do you think that, given how horrendous Deshaun Watson was last week, we can feel confidence in any of the Browns?
No, none whatsoever, apart from possibly Jerome Ford, who had a 79% opportunity share, 7 targets, which was quite interesting to see how many targets he did get. I don't know whether that's a factor of this new look offense. Elijah Moore surprised us by playing the second most wide receiver snaps at 93%, which I don't think anybody was particularly expecting. Maybe that's just the case that Jerry Jeudy's going to ramp up. He did have some injury issues through training camp. I don't want to start any of them. I don't even want to start Amari Cooper. Deshaun Watson is absolutely cooked. Ever since the Browns gave him that contract, whether it's mental, whether it's just the time off has left him completely rusty and without a feel for the game, without getting into the fact that he's just a horrible human being. Like, he can't do it. He can't pass the ball deep. He can't pass the ball accurately. He doesn't see things. He's panicking. And if the Browns are able to, why would they not try to get out of the contract at the minute? On the Jags side of things, Tank Bigsby was so good to see him finally pay off on almost 2 years of coach speak, where they talked about how much they wanted to see from him. 12 rushes for 73 yards, 6.7 yards per carry to Travis Etienne's 3.7. Etienne still has the 2-minute and goal line work for now, but it's hard to ignore the fact that, like, he was about to walk in for a touchdown and then fumbled the ball last week. That's the kind of thing that can really harm a coach's confidence in you. This week, the Jags came out and talked about how they want to give Etienne the ball more. They don't view it as a problem. But if Bigsby keeps improving, then we're going to see this become more of a timeshare than people who drafted Travis Etienne would like. Not my problem. Didn't draft him. But how impressed were you by Brian Thomas Jr.'s debut?
He was phenomenal. I mean, I wasn't the biggest Brian Thomas. I thought he had incredible boom-bust potential, but I didn't think he was going to be this nuanced of a route runner. He didn't show me that in college. His ability to break defenders down was, lights and days improved to what he was doing at LSU, where he's basically just mossing people going deep. I'm really excited about what he could do in this offense, but also for Trevor Lawrence. I think we saw first three quarters, Trevor Lawrence essentially playing the quarterback that we all hoped he would be. Okay, they didn't win the game, and I'm not sure they can necessarily put that on him, but I think it's wheels up for this offense. I'm very excited about Lawrence, Brian Thomas, Tank Bigsby, even Gabe Davis. But yeah, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, their usage is alarming, concerning, and I'm not sure we can start moving forward.
No, and particularly in this matchup against what we expect to be a pretty elite defense. They came out last week and still held their own against the Cowboys pretty well. So, yeah, I think, you can start Trevor Lawrence if you need to, but I wouldn't be against going to the waivers and trying to find somebody else to get you through this matchup. Otherwise, I'd start Brian Thomas Jr. I think we saw enough from him. Trevor Lawrence's QB rating when targeting Brian Thomas Jr. was almost perfect at 155.2, despite the fact that on the day, Trevor Lawrence wasn't very efficient. And then, I'd start Jerome Ford, I'd start Travis Etienne. Everyone else, this just doesn't feel like the matchup for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next matchup we're going to talk about, I feel like you get a nice platform to talk about J.K. Dobbins and how he broke out finally and produced as the most efficient back. He now gets the absolute dream matchup against the Carolina Panthers defense that looked absolutely horrendous against New Orleans last week. Oh, and their only good player on the defense, Derrick Brown, is now out for the season. Could this just be the Chargers running 200-300 yards up on this Panthers defense?
I mean, it should be. That's what Greg Roman goes to bed at night sleeping about and dreaming about. And yeah, seeing J.K. Dobbins, like I tweeted a couple of weeks ago that if I could grant 3 players unlimited health for this season, J.K. Dobbins would easily be one of them because well, he's easily had some of the worst injury luck over the last few seasons. And the way some people talk about him as being completely washed, completely done, it's just, let's just be a bit kinder. But going back to the start of 2020, with running backs who've averaged 200 carries, J.K. Dobbins averages 6.1 yards per carry, which is first. He's first in EPA per carry, first in rush yards over expected per carry. He's second in yards after contact per carry and 7th in success rate. J.K. Dobbins, when he's been on the field, has been excellent. Yes, he got chased down on that 61-yard run, but we saw that from Breece Hall last year, that the speed, it comes back over time as the season goes on. And if JK can keep playing well, then I'd expect that to come back. Gus Edwards isn't a threat at the minute. He forced 0 missed tackles last week on 11 attempts. He's been down bad pretty much since halfway through last season. I've talked about that before. That's what led to the Zay Flowers explosion. I'd be looking at Kamani Vidal as someone to pick up on waivers and stash if you're in a redraft league with enough bench spots where you don't need someone immediately. Lad McConkey seems like he might prove me wrong a bit. I wasn't overly high on him. He led the team in targets. He did only have 5.3 air yards per target, so nothing crazy. But if he can be that outlet for Justin Herbert, then that's fine. On the Panthers side, this one, it's just, you see they were the lowest explosive play rate team in week 1. They were chucking the ball deep because they were chasing the game the whole time. I'd start Deontay Johnson. I think Xavier Legette is someone we can keep an eye on. He led the team with 7 targets. I don't want any part of the running back room, and I definitely don't want any part of Bryce Young, who had a 43% completion rate.
Yeah, I do wonder, I talked about it with the Saints matchup. I do wonder if last week we can just kind of tear it up and move on for the Panthers.
Yeah.
They went 3 and out on their first 2 drives and were 17-0 down. Like, it's hard to call a game when you've not even got through your first script to 10 plays and you're already that far down. So hopefully, this week is more of a realistic game and we can actually see maybe some of this Panthers offense starts to take a step forward. But I don't think you can start any of them unless you're in, real desperation states, which hopefully in week 2, you're not desperate already.
Hopefully not.
The Las Vegas Raiders versus the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the Raiders' backfield was fairly, contentious all off season. We saw Zamir White in that running back dead zone territory. People expected him to get a lot of the workload, and that was completely not the case last week. Do you feel like this Raiders offense is now Alexander Mattison's to own, or do you think we could see it shift back towards Zamir White?
I think there'll be games where it's Zamir White. The team clearly like him, but the problem for Zamir White is that he's not going to get the third down work. We saw Alexander Mattison run 24 routes to Zamir's 10. We've never really seen Zamir White look like a pass catching back, particularly. And then you throw in the fact that White wasn't even overly efficient on his rushing work. He had 46 rush yards on 13 attempts last week. So a little, just edging over that 3 yards per carry area. And then he fumbled the ball as well. So Alexander Mattison, the hate went too far on him after a year where he was fumbling the ball a lot in Minnesota. But he's a decent running back. We've seen decent points for him. And I think, though, in negative game scripts, which is what we expect the Raiders to be in an awful lot of the time, this is going to be Alexander Mattison who will lead the backfield in touches. What surprised me was Gardner Minshew being slightly more efficient than I expected from him, seeing him have a 75% completion rate. And Brock Bowers going out there and immediately leading the team with 8 targets and 6 catches. Occasionally, the Ravens can give up good games to the tight end position. Sometimes you find that if they can find the soft spots and keep themselves away from Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton, tight ends have been able to exploit things. So I don't mind starting Brock Bowers this week. Devontae Adams, though, I mean, the alarm bells need to be flashing for anyone who drafted him. He wasn't somebody we would draft him, but he went 559 and he had more than that in 11 of his 17 games last year. That was playing with Aiden O'Connell. I can't imagine that he felt particularly happy only getting 59 yards on 5 catches. I'm not sure that I think he's going to have a better week than this week. The Baltimore defense gave up a couple of blown coverages last week to the Chiefs, but that was against guys like Xavier Worthy, who've probably got a little bit more speed. I'll let you speak on that one, whether you've got more faith in Devontae Adams. But on the Ravens side, Derrick Henry just feels like he's going to be in for a big game. It's going to be positive game script, so Justice Hill won't be mixing in as much as he did last week. Derrick Henry can touch the ball plenty. I think we're going to see a Mark Andrews bounce back because unless the Raiders take a page out of the Chiefs book and opt to double cover Andrews at the highest rate that he'd been double covered in the last 3 years, then Mark Andrews is going to find space at times. And otherwise, it'd just be nice to see Zay Flowers push downfield a little bit more. He's 5.4 air yards per target. It's not great. And 29% of Lamar's passes being behind the line of scrimmage is the most I can remember in the Lamar era.
Yeah, I think on that point with Flowers, part of the issue is that 4 of his targets came in the screen game. So, those are naturally going to be at the line of scrimmage. That's always going to affect that kind of ADOT, and that lays into Lamar being almost 30% behind the line of scrimmage. It's great that he's getting those manufactured touches, but we'd like to see him be pushed down the field a little bit more as well. On the Devontae Adams thing, I'm absolutely terrified. You talked about Gardner Minshew being slightly efficient and a little bit surprising. Well, he had a league low 4.7 ADOT last year. Like, you can't be a starting quarterback in the NFL and have that. This whole offense, the whole ethos around the Raiders is that they want to run the ball and kind of grind teams down that way. Well, the way you complement a physical run game is by pushing the ball downfield, having high ADOT and taking shots off play action. And that doesn't fit Gardner Minshew. I think that his mesh with Devontae Adams is horrendous. And I think that unless there's a quarterback change in Las Vegas, I'd be looking to get rid of Devontae Adams as soon as possible because I'm really alarmed. I love you calling Mark Adams as a bounce back. I think if you can go out and buy him in a dynasty league right now, I absolutely would. If you can trade for him in redraft, I absolutely would. I don't buy in that Isaiah Likely is going to be the tight end one. I think you look at the snaps and how they're used in terms of Mark Andrews playing out the slot over 70% of the time. I still think he's the number one tight end in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, Isaiah Likely is definitely an exciting player. The way the Ravens used him was exciting, but I mean, Mark Andrews is a stud, and Lamar throws to the guys he trusts. Lamar and Mark Andrews have a really good relationship, and let's remember that Mark Andrews was in a car crash a couple of weeks ago. It's gonna, it could be taking some time to ramp back up, but I have no concerns about Mark Andrew. I think Isaiah Likely will be kind of a flex consideration for me week to week rather than necessarily an automatic tight end starter.
Yeah, absolutely. And on Justice Hill as well, obviously surprising usage week 1, great in the passing game. I don't think you can start him this week just because I don't think the Ravens are going to be looking to pass. They're not going to be chasing from behind. I think it's going to be a Derrick Henry week, definitely. The Jets versus the Titans. I don't know about you. I was disappointed with the Jets, but I was impressed with Aaron Rodgers. I thought he looked healthy. I thought he looked mobile. I thought the arm talent is still there. Could this be an opportunity where he beasts up on a fairly poor Titans defense?
He should do, and the way to beat the Titans is through the air. Rodgers coming off a 61% completion rate. When you go back to the last time he played properly in 2022, he averaged 65% completion rate. So we should be seeing an improvement there. And you look at the Titans. Yes, the Bears didn't beat up on them through the air, but they're a tough run defense game. So perhaps Breece Hall struggles again after only putting up 3.4 yards per carry, seeing minus 0.2 yards before contact per attempt last week. But I think that what we'll see is we'll see Alan Lazard out there plenty, whether he gets touchdowns when we get near to the red zone or in those situations where Aaron Rodgers feels he needs the guy he can trust is a tricky question, which people are going to struggle with for a while. But Garrett Wilson should be primed for an absolute bounce back here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Jets, through 40 minutes of the game last week, there was only 2 skill position players that touched the ball, and that's Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. I expect something similar this week. Mike Williams only played 9 snaps. He's on a pitch count. I'd expect him to be up to maybe 10 to 15, but I don't think you can touch any Jets player other than that. Excited about Tony Pollard's usage, the fact that he's, seeing 60, 70% of this backfield. He was obviously the guy that this regime went out and paid. Are you comfortable starting him this week?
Yeah, seeing him average 5.1 yards per carry on 16 touches was really positive. Tajee Spears only had 4 carries, so that's why he lands in our sits rather than Pollard, who's in our starts. I think both of them are going to see usage in the pass game, and there'll be weeks where it's good in weeks where it's not. But Tony Pollard looked much closer to his old self pre the injury, pre last year, where he was quite disappointing. Outside of him, DeAndre Hopkins is a definite sit. He had a 23% route participation last week. He only had one target. And the Titans have talked this week about the fact that they are ramping him up slowly. So I don't want to be starting him. I saw him get dropped in one of my redraft leagues. If you see him get dropped, I'd be fine picking him up on waivers. Yeah, this is DeAndre Hopkins I'm talking about. Calvin Ridley, I think you can start because he led the team with 7 targets. He did only catch 3 for 50. This is kind of a Calvin Ridley experience. But yes, the Jets have a very good pass defense. But if last week wasn't just a blip, then perhaps it's possible for Ridley to have an okay day. But I definitely would not be starting Will Levis anytime soon after last week.
No, so on the Ridley point, it's also worth mentioning Michael Carter's probably not going to play this week, who's the Jets nickel. DJ Reed has missed practice, and Sauce Gardner left the game for periods last week. So all 3 of the Jets starting corners are battling injuries already. The Rams versus Arizona are up next. But before we get to the late window, if you've not dropped your questions in, start, sit, trade questions, whatever you want, get them in the comments below. We'll answer 100% of those questions. This feels like a nice matchup, Tom. 49.5 over under, but the Rams offense is absolutely decimated through week 1. We've got 4 offensive linemen potentially missing this week. Puka Nacua has gone on IR. Is this just going to be Matt Stafford force feeding the ball to Cooper Kupp because they got nothing else?
Yeah, and there's injuries on both sides for the offensive line, with the Cardinals losing Jonah Williams to IR. He recently signed, what was it, a 3-year, $30 million contract, someone they were counting on. So offensive line play is going to be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how much the opposing defenses get to each quarterback, because obviously we're going to see more scrambling from Kyler Murray if he's got pressure coming his way than you'd expect from Matt Stafford. But I think Stafford is going to get the ball out very quickly to Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp looks healthy. Cooper Kupp, yes, it took him, 21 targets to get to 110 yards and a touchdown last week, but I don't care. I don't care if Cooper Kupp's getting 100 yards and a touchdown, if he's going to rack up all those catches. That's fantasy gold. So yeah, Cooper Kupp should be somebody that people start with absolute confidence. Running back wise, I think we do see Blake Corum mix in the 0 snaps that he got last week. Sean McVay talked this week about how they need to get him involved. And Sean McVay tends to be quite reliable with that stuff. But I do think this is Kyren Williams, and it's on the other side of the game. This is also James Conner's world. And for now, they'll continue to get decent amounts of volume until we see otherwise. Outside of the kind of studs, Demarcus Robinson should be picked up in every league. Last year, from week 12 onwards, he averaged 80.7% of snaps, 13 or more PPR points in all 6 of those games. And now he's going to be, the wide receiver 2, if not the wide receiver 3, on a team that plays a heavy amount of wide receiver 3 sets. Jordan Whittington had a touchdown called back on an end around for holding. I think he's worth stashing, but you probably don't want to start him too soon. Over the summer, John Rodriguez of The Athletic, the Rams beat reporter, talked about how he is the direct backup to either Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp if something went wrong. But it's possible that they still bring him along slowly.
Yeah, I think you saw last week, Demarcus Robinson became an every down player once the Nacua injury happened, and we saw Tyler Johnson step in. Some of that is just your in-game veteran wide receiver, plug him in. I love Jordan Whittington as a prospect. I think that it's a really interesting profile, and I love the shout of you to go and grab him now, because he could be an absolute league winner moving forward if the Puka Nacua injury does drag on like it seems to. But we've kind of buried the lead here, Tom. Marvin Harrison, my start of the week. It feels ridiculous. A rookie wide receiver 1 week into his career, and we're already talking about the squeaky wheel narrative. I think they're going to force feed Marvin Harrison the ball this week. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw a 12 to 15 target game, and I think Marvin Harrison's going to absolutely dominate this week.
Yeah, just take all those targets that went to Greg Dortch for minimal gains and send them Marvin Harrison's way. I mean, 1 catch for 4 yards is abysmal. He was wide open on that play, which would have been easily a touchdown. I think, the Cardinals just need to do a better job of making sure that he's in their game plan often and early. And it wouldn't surprise me if on the first Cardinals drive, we saw 3 targets go Marvin Harrison's way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're in the bunker now, scheming it all up, and going to force feed him the ball. Probably the most disappointing team last week were the Cincinnati Bengals. We've seen them the last 3 years come slow out the gates in September. They're 0-1. They're now facing the two-time Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs. It feels slightly hyperbolic to say this, but is this a must-win game for Cincinnati?
Well, because of that slow start and the fact that they've been able to turn things around as seasons go on, normally I would say it would be a must win, but because of that, maybe it's not. I mean, you see on the screen there that 1-8 over the last 4 years in their opening 2 games. So it's not even that they're slow in the openers where they're 1-5 under Zach Taylor. They just don't start the season well. Perhaps part of that comes back to the fact that Joe Burrow seems to always be injured in the offseason. This was supposed to be the offseason where he started the season healthy, and now we're getting videos of him barely able to pick up a water bottle. So it's difficult. It seemed like he really didn't want to let loose when the game was calling for it last week. He wasn't driving the ball downfield. He had 29 passes, but only 7 went more than 7 yards in the air. 5.7 yards per attempt is not going to get it done. This is supposed to be the guy with the moxie, the guy with the attitude who always just drags the team out of the doldrums and into the fire, you know. So it wasn't a good start, but I think you're looking at a combination of factors. You're looking at a team that perhaps the coaching forces them to start slow. Perhaps the coaching isn't doing a good enough job of getting them up and ready for the season. Joe Burrow's injury, Jamar Chase not having practice consistently, T. Higgins not being out there. I mean, Andrei Yoshevich had 100% of dropbacks, but only managed 5.8 PPR points. So perhaps he's not able to step into the role in the way the Bengals hoped he did. But over the years, Joe Burrow has been excellent in Arrowhead against the Chiefs. So if he's going to do it, then perhaps this is the environment for him to do it. If he needs some motivation to go out there and feel more ramped up to feel like, oh, we're going to prove everyone wrong, then this should be that environment. On the Chiefs side, though, for me, this is a Isaiah Pacheco big game. We saw Ramondre absolutely just destroyed the Bengals run defense. So Pacheco's my start of the week. He had a 78% opportunity share week 1. He went 15 for 45 and 1 touchdown, which isn't great, only 3 yards per carry. But we've seen the Bengals when they don't have DJ Reader, they've just really struggled to stop the run. Otherwise, I mean, how do you feel about Travis Kelce after he had 4 targets and went 3 for 34? Do you think we're going to see him used like he was last regular season where they kind of held him back for the playoffs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, part of the appeal of Travis Kelce over the years was that he was the clear number one target. That's not the case now. And I think that Rashi Rice is being used in those underneath crossing routes to try and break down zone. And that's what Travis Kelce used to eat. I expect Travis Kelce to be a solid kind of mid tight end one. I think the days of him being a true difference maker at the position are gone, sadly. But yeah, really excited about Rashi Rice. Super excited about Xavier Worthy and the way that the Chiefs schemed him up last week and got those free releases, got him involved in the manufactured touch game on screens and rushes. If Hollywood Brown isn't active, I think Worthy and Rashi Rice are absolutely smash starts this week as well.
Yep, I'd agree. I mean, in terms of the start sits, when you look at it, I mean, Pacheco, obviously, Jamar Chase, you've got to start him. The role will grow over time. And then I'd be willing to start Xavier Worthy as kind of like my wide receiver 3. Zach Moss, I think you can start with confidence. We saw that he had a much bigger role than Chase Brown, 66% snaps. Chase Brown's 33%, played a lot more of the third down stuff as well. Otherwise, I'd be sitting Joe Burrow. I think, if you want to risk starting Joe Burrow, fine, but I think there's better options to stream this week.
Yeah, no, I agree. He's my QB 18 this week. I think you can definitely approach someone else. The Russell Wilson Bowl, minus Russell Wilson. Looks like Justin Fields is going to play this week. Are you comfortable starting Justin Fields given we're likely to see 10 plus rush attempts again?
Well, it'd be nice if Justin Fields could score a touchdown, whether he passed or threw for one. That was kind of the thing last week where it's like, okay, great day for Chris Boswell, the Steelers kicker, but not really for anyone else. And, fair play to the Steelers. They went on the road and against a team which people were expecting to be good, they just had their way with them, really. Fields, he had a 73% completion rate, which is far better than a lot of times throughout his career, but it was only good for 156 yards. Like, he had 4 10-yard pass attempts all game. So it's also, Josh Norris pointed this out on Twitter. the middle of the field is lava to Justin Fields. Everything is going to the boundary or downfield. He doesn't seem comfortable throwing to the middle. And you combine that with they had 3 tight ends play 36 plus snaps. So it becomes very difficult to go, okay, outside of George Pickens, is anybody worth starting? And if you're going to start George Pickens, is he going to see Patrick Surtain's shadow in the same way that Patrick Surtain shadowed DK Metcalf on 95% of plays in week 1? So I'm not excited about virtually anyone in this game. I think you can start Najee Harris with fairly good confidence, but Jalen Warren, they seem to be taking their time to get him back out there, make sure the hamstring injury is sorted. On the Broncos side, Bo Nix taking 34 pass attempts to get to 100 yards is diabolical. The first 6 drives all ended in punts or turnovers. And I don't think there's a single player I really feel good about on that side of it.
No, absolutely. It just doesn't mesh with the rest of the offense in terms of Cortland Sutton, big bodied outside downfield receiver, and Bo Nix is just trying to nickel and dime it. The rushing production is great, but I don't feel confident enough in him to start him basically any week. So, yeah, I don't think there's anyone I really like starting this week because I'm nervous about George Pickens being shadowed by Pat Surtain, as you highlighted. I think it's Najee Harris, and that's it. I don't even want to touch Javonte Williams because we saw McLaughlin get all of the early down work. It's kind of the complete reverse of what we expected in this offense. So, yeah, I think we'll just leave this matchup alone and move swiftly on. We're going to touch on Sunday Night Football now, though. Chicago versus Houston. I guess this was poised as potentially the 2 future superstar quarterbacks, but Caleb Williams came out and, let's be honest, was really disappointing as a rookie.
Yep.
I don't know about you. It felt like he was almost too hyped up. Like he was so animated and so excited that I don't think he was in any shape to be able to settle down and kind of read it out and pass the ball around.
Yeah, and I was definitely guilty of expecting too much of Caleb coming out of the offseason where it seemed everything went right for him. In the preseason, he looked good. Everything we saw out of training camp suggested that he could hit the ground running. And because of the offensive environment around him, it felt like, okay, well, how could he not succeed against a Tennessee team that we expect to be up there for the number 1 overall pick next year? Then he gets 3 yards per attempt, 93 yards on 29 attempts. He also lost 29 yards on sacks, which is the thing that in college he was really good at avoiding. He was really good at not taking those kind of losses. So it was definitely a little, okay, just hold your horses. Maybe we need to let this develop a bit more. It could have been a better day, though. I mean, Keenan Allen dropped at least 1 touchdown right on the goal line where it was like inches away from his fingertips. The running backs, I don't view anybody as somebody I wanted to start. Obviously, Roschon Johnson was a healthy scratch, which was a bit surprising given this team drafted him just last year. The tight end room played out exactly as all the alarm bells have been saying, that Cole Kmet is going to be sharing with Gerald Everett. Gerald Everett played more snaps than Cole Kmet. So if you drafted Cole Kmet, now's the time to just, you should have been going after Isaiah Likely or one of these other tight ends very early on the waiver wire. But the biggest thing about this game for me is, do the Texans continue to ride Joe Mixon? 33 touches for 159 rushing yards and a touchdown last week was crazy volume. This week, they talked about how Dameon Pierce looked good on the few touches that he had and that they'd like to keep involved in him. That's worth noting because Dameon Pierce's offseason was very up and down. Outside of him, the wide receivers, I mean, you're obviously starting all the Texan wide receivers and you're starting CJ Stroud.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really interested that, Bobby Slowick, we've heard consistently, he wants to run the ball. He wants to be more efficient. He wants to run, set up the pass. And yeah, I didn't expect 33 touches for Joe Mixon, but I think you've got to listen to what the coaches are telling you. From a wide receiver standpoint, you know that I'm a huge Tank Dell fan. You know that Nico Collins looked like an absolute stud, but the Diggs usage is wild. I mean, the ODOT, real concern. I think he's going to need to see 7-8 targets a week in order to be startable if he's going to have that lower ADOT. So it's definitely worth monitoring if it's just a 1-week blip or if that's how they're viewing it, as Dell and Collins going deep and Stephon Diggs doing nothing more than kind of 5 yards downfield.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I saw somebody on Twitter, I can't remember who, so apologies for not crediting them, but somebody pointed out that 2 of Diggs's targets were in the end zone, where obviously the average depth of target is going to be shallower, and those are the touches which kind of matter. So I think there was part of it in the game last week. But yeah, I mean, all off season I've been Nico, been Tank Dell, and then Stephon Diggs in that order. But it was encouraging for anyone who did have to draft Stephon Diggs for at least he was getting the ball thrown his way. CJ Stroud only 4 for 13 on the ground, QB7 on the week. Like, that's what it's going to be like for him. He's got to throw a load of touchdowns or it's going to be hard to compete at the top.
Absolutely. And the only other thing to mention, Rome Odunze looking like he's probably not going to play this week. Keenan Allen, we were expecting him and DJ Moore to be every down players. Keenan Allen lost a lot of snaps for Rome Odunze last week. If Odunze is out, it could be good news for Keenan Allen and potentially his fantasy ceiling. Monday Night Football, Atlanta at Philadelphia Eagles, 2-2 in prime time. I thought Jalen Hurts looked so much better against the blitz last week. We heard it all last year. He struggled. He didn't have an answer. I don't know if the answers were great. It seemed that a lot of it was outbreaking routes and kind of those quick releases. That feels quite easy to scheme up against if he's going to be the same every single week. But through 1 week, it feels like a check mark for Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he wasn't particularly efficient on the ground. He only had 13 attempts and only managed 33 rushing yards. So it would be nice to see that closer to 50 on that many attempts. You know, you look at guys like Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson who put up significantly more on similar attempts. Obviously, a couple of those attempts for Jalen Hurts were the cheek sneak, brotherly shove, tush push, whatever you want to call it, which failed. So do we see them keep trying to do that? Or do we end up seeing them go to Saquon Barkley, who came out and had a really nice week one? And for all the bookmarkers and people up in my mentions this week, of course, we expected Saquon Barkley to look good against the Packers. Their rush defense was one of the worst in the league last year. They didn't make any additions that would make you think, okay, they're going to be excellent. So I was impressed by Saquon. He did look to have some juice back, and obviously the pass catching role was noteworthy because he had a dot of 10 yards. But I'm still not sure that I would be going out and trading for Saquon and thinking he's going to be a difference maker this year. The Devonta Smith usage was also really encouraging, though, 70% in the slot versus 31% there in 2023. Dallas Goedert is an every week tight end one fringe kind of player for me now. The usage was quite encouraging. Yes, he didn't score massively, but not many tight ends did last week. And then in general, I just think this Eagles team is going to be very good, and I want to be trying to acquire people on it. The Falcons I have far more concerns about because Kirk Cousins just looked pretty miserable out there. He was really immobile, really seemed to be not trusting his leg. And then when you talk about my guy for the year, Drake London, I'm trying to make excuses for him because he was shadowed by Joey Porter on 70% of snaps that he played. And on those snaps, he didn't get any catches, barely any targets. Kirk Cousins was just looking elsewhere. But outside of that, we saw what we wanted from Bijan. We saw what we wanted from Kyle Pitts. I think this offense will have better days, but right now it's just a little worrying.
Yeah, I think it's potentially a squeaky wheel game for Drake London. I think he could get forced for targets, but I'm really, really concerned about Kirk Cousins. You know, you think of Kirk Cousins in his prime, it's under center, play action, efficient passing. He's 0% under center last week, 0% play action. He broke the pocket once, and that was on the Kyle Pitts touchdown, which, I mean, he had so long in the pocket. That was ridiculous on that play. Like, I am really, really concerned. I think this shows the difference between him and Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers was obviously a left Achilles. It's not the plant leg. Kirk Cousins was the right Achilles, and he did it several weeks later. I think hopefully Kirk Cousins can continue to get healthy and continue to come around to it. But yeah, very concerned there. The final matchup of the week. Before we get there, though, hit subscribe. If you've made it this far and haven't, we've got this show every single week. We've got Dynasty Buys, we've got DFS, everything to get you covered. Hit subscribe and you won't miss out. The Thursday night football matchup, Buffalo versus Miami. Can't believe it. We're 1 week in and already we've got concerns about the Miami backfield. Raheem Mostert has been ruled out as of recording. Devon Achane looks like he's going to be a game time decision. Is it Jalen Wright or Jeff Wilson for you this week?
I think it ends up being Jeff Wilson. I was kind of surprised by Jeff Wilson's usage last week because it was. I think that clearly there's an element of earning your role within the Miami backfield. Yes, last year, Devon Achane was a healthy scratch week one and then went out there and started being excellent. But who's to say Jalen Wright goes through the same process? So yeah, I think Jeff Wilson will probably see a decent amount of touches tonight. Otherwise, though, it was reassuring to see Tyreek go out there and just do the Tyreek thing, 7 for 130 and a touchdown. That was his 12th touchdown of his career that was at least 75 yards or longer. Jalen Waddle, 6 catches for 111 yards. I drafted so much Jalen Waddle that was really reassuring. He had a 62% completion rate. He had a better rate in all but 3 games last year. So it'd be nice to see him come out and have a more accurate game, considering that the Jacksonville defense isn't exactly the most daunting one he could face. Devin Achan against the Bills over the last year had 11 for 120 and 2 touchdowns and 11 from 61 for 1 touchdown. So if you're playing Devin Achan, I think you can feel pretty good about that matchup. Mike McDaniel clearly knows how to deploy him against the Bills. On the Bills side, though, I don't feel good about anything coming out of this game. I know that you're higher on Dalton Kincaid's usage than I am, but this is from Sam Sherman on Twitter. Across 14 starts, Isaiah Likely's eclipsed 18 PPR points 6 times with 3 games above 20 points. Kincaid has 1 18-plus game and 0 above 20 in 17 games. And it's kind of at that point for me where I'm just like, Dalton Kincaid, when's it going to happen? Because we saw Dawson Knox out there play 35 and 61 snaps, ran 14 routes to Dalton Kincaid's 25. The gap between them doesn't feel big enough that Dalton Kincaid is going to pay off his cost.
Yeah, I'm not sure of payoff his cost. I think I was with you. I didn't like him at cost. I just think that the reaction to Dalton Kincaid has been outrageous. He was out on the field. I think he was running over 80% of routes. Like, I think the underlying numbers are there. I think if you can go out and buy low as people are overreacting to 1 week, I like it. I think he's going to be a good solid, tight end 5, 6, 7, something like that. I don't think he's ever going to be a top 3 tight end, sadly, with the way this offense is going to be kind of equal opportunity and the ball's going to get shared around. But that is it for this week. That is it. Every single matchup we have covered. Make sure, get your comments in the below. We will answer any of your start sit questions, trade questions. Tom will be back in the next few days before the weekend with his DFS breakdowns. And before that, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.